Joshua Smith here, and welcome to the GSD Mode podcast. Now get shit done and smash that subscribe button now. All right, what is up, my peeps? Joshua Smith here with another GSD Mode podcast interview. And today, guys, we are joined with another rockstar, amazing guest here today. Our guest today, Andrew Manning. And just to give you guys a little background, a little context before we jump into this interview here, Andrew has been or is in the top 1% of realtors worldwide, sold over $2 billion in real estate sales himself. Personally, he's got licensed back in 1986. 80% of his business is referral based. And he's built this massive referral network all across the U.S. that's even expanded into other countries. And really stoked and honored to have Andrew here on the podcast with us today. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, man. One of the things I love about picking and having the ability to interview and really just sit down and pick amazing brains like yours, from not just from the standpoint of being a top producer. I mean, that's amazing, of course, too, and awesome, but also that as long as you've been in the business, right? Because if we look at since 1986, I mean, you've seen a lot of ups and downs, you've seen a lot of changes, I mean, if we look at whether you want to call them recessions or whatever, but you got .com bubble, you got 9/11, you got the Great Recession, you got this COVID craziness we're going through right now. You've seen anything and everything from interest rate fluctuations to when you first got in, was it the IDX open like it is now, or was that was that like listing book time back still in 1986?
Oh God, this was back to no one had a computer on their desk that you had to share computer time. You had to put your name on a list, and the computer was the black screen with the yellow writing, super old school, early Steve Jobs computer time. And then we had our listings. When the listings came out, they delivered tiny printed sheets, no photos, and they dropped them in a mailbox, however many copies for the agents. It was in a locked mailbox, and the listing secretary had to open it up. And then you would flip through, and all you had was a Thomas Guide coordinate. There were no nav systems or anything. And you would have to Xerox a map page from the Thomas Guide to go on Caravan, and everybody would jump in the car with, 5-6 people. And you try to see, on a Tuesday or Friday, which are our Caravan days when we used to Caravan, that would be people that were going, it was just unbelievable. You'd get out there and people, we're trying to see 20, 30 houses in a 3-hour period, in multiple cities. And it was a lot. No photos for the clients either. The younger agents today are spoiled because, everybody's on a search field, everybody's on their Redfin app or whatever app you have them set up on, and they know about the houses before you do, and everybody feels like you've already been there because you've seen the photos. But in these days, when I started, as a young realtor in college at the same time, I started out and no pictures. We actually you took pictures of the houses, and people could come into the office like a flip book, and you would look at hard copy photos of the houses. It was crazy. You'd have to get a hard copy photo and run to one of the photo developing places to get a photo that would go out to everybody. And that also, everything developed, and I was probably one of the last agents to jump on the tech bandwagon because, I'm embarrassing, but I tell people they think it's hysterical. I didn't have a computer on my desk until probably 20 years ago, maybe, but everyone else had this going. And I didn't do email 20 years ago. Probably started email maybe 20 years ago. And then of course that's like a giant time suck that grabs you and you can't let it go. So we get probably 300 to 400 emails a day, in my office from business vendors, people after you, pitching properties, whatnot. So I've got, my system is I've got 2 full-time licensed assistants that work for me. One has worked for me for 15 years, Robin, who's amazing. She moved to Kentucky like 2 years ago and retired basically. And then she went back, and it was her idea. She said, I can still work for you. I'm 3 hours ahead. And she says she was our email color. So she gets on at 5 a.m, starts responding to clients, and like, your office is so efficient. I'm getting emails at 5:45. You are on it. Got appointments are made, inspections are booked. So that's been great, because for me, in my mind, I thought, how am I going to have an offsite assistant. You know, we need bodies for help showing property. But so I have one in the office, one outside the office, but it's mainly me. So I don't have a giant team, but we're working hard all the time.
That's awesome, man. I love it. So I'm curious, and then we'll jump into more of your journey and all the amazing things that you've done to create this success. But I'm, you know, I just, and the reason I'm bringing this up is, you know, and I've been in since 2005 in this industry, but even during that time, man, I can't tell you how, I mean, it's, I don't know, half a dozen different specific times where it's, you know, this massive fear around real estate agents thinking, oh, the extinction of the agent is here, you know, right? Or, you know, like, I mean, how many times throughout your career, I guess, have you witnessed that, you know, right? Like, okay, the introduction of the IDX where it's like, oh, well, you know, people aren't going to see value, need the agent anymore. And then, you know, and then of course we saw this, you know, as you start seeing these technology companies, these iBuyers moving into the marketplace. And, you know, again, it creates a lot of this fear that agents have and, you know, thinking that we're potentially going extinct. And, you know, so, I mean, throughout this span, all the changes that you've seen, man, I mean, I'm just, you know, kind of curious of, you know, what your perception is, you know, right. Just to kind of try to manage people's fears, I guess, of that.
Right. I think that's a great question because I've seen that develop, you know, this year will be 35 years for me. So it's like insane. I can't believe that since I'm only 41. I don't know how I was doing it that long, but yeah, but getting in there, there's so many developments along the way. I mean, when photos started going online and people would call you up with questions like, what's this room over here? What's that room over there? I think our big issue now today with a lot of these smaller, you know, capture companies, buyer search sites that were trying to capture buyers. We've seen a lot of the smaller ones come and go, you know, like the Purple Bricks and that kind of thing started in our area and they're gone. They've pulled out, you know, all these smaller companies that were trying to just basically capture your buyers. When in there, people were fighting the lead generation systems in the beginning, and people were fighting when Redfin and Zillow and Trulia wanted to put your information. The boards of realtors were all fighting. I know this happened all over the country. Finally, everybody just gave in to the giants and said, hey, you know, what are we going to do to get this process moving? I was probably one of the first agents that signed reciprocal agreements with the other companies when that wasn't a natural thing that say, hey, you can advertise my listing on your website, your company website, whoever, as long as it says, you know, listing provided courtesy of Andrew Manning. Because I think these capture sites, the idea is to confuse the buyer into contacting them directly, and the less sophisticated agents and buyers out there, you know, they see the scrolling name or names on the right-hand column, and you're interested in seeing this property, you know, click here and schedule an appointment. And of course, everybody wants instant gratification, so they don't go all the way down and read the whole thing to see the actual listing agent's name at the bottom. So I think that's something, I mean, when that first started with the Redfins and that, I would have people showing up to my listings and the agent and the buyer are like shaking hands in front of the house they've never met before. And I couldn't believe that phenomenon in the beginning. Now it's not, now I see it all the time, doesn't bother me. I know some good agents at Redfin and other companies, which are fine. But I think our biggest job as agents, whether you're particularly on the buying side today or the listing side, is proving your value and what you're worth to a seller. So for somebody like me, who's not a newer agent, you know, my pitch to people is that, hey, I'm a relationship guy. I know all the agents. I said, there's probably a 90% chance that, you know, if I'm showing a buyer and we get into a multiple offer, I'm probably going to know that agent. And maybe I pitch myself as having a little bit of an edge because I've got a little bit of the inside track knowing some of these people. And since I'm not an overly aggressive, obnoxious agent, you know, I can call them and usually get people to tell me their story and get some more information than just somebody who, no one picks up the phone anymore. Everybody just texts and emails. And so even my office, people that work for me, and I find myself doing it myself, trying to sort of go back a little more old school. One of my things I do with all clients, buyers or sellers, is find out what their preferred method of communication is on day one, because there are people that don't want to be texted. There are old school, I work with a lot of older clients who are like, they're just learning how to text or they're new. So they're like, can you text me to tell me that you sent me an email? And I'm like, really? We have to do that now? But that's important information because otherwise you're used to just sending an email and we don't hear back right away. I mean, I work with one of the guys that was on on a big TV show, and he's quite older and, you know, stoned half the time. So when I'm calling him, it's like, you'll send an email. If you don't tell him that you sent him an email, he could respond 3 days later. So it's like we're in a negotiation to sell off part of his backyard that was another separate lot to a developer, and he just doesn't respond. So I have to text him to tell him I sent him the email. Then I have to call him on his cell phone because sometimes he doesn't look at his text. So you get normal, and then there's other people, the younger generation, just text me. They don't want an email, they don't want a phone call, only text me, never email me or call me. You know, so I think that's important to establish communication, because while we're trying to prove our worth to buyers and sellers in the marketplace, and we're facing commission pressures from people who, well, this person will do it for less, that person will do it for less, this one's going to give me back all this commission if they sell me a house, or, you know, my aunt or my uncle kind of thing. Those are all arguments that I probably have on almost a daily basis, trying to prove my net worth. So it's like, if I'm coming in there and saying, hey, what am I worth as an agent? So I said, I like to put my almost 35 years of experience, you know, to work for you with my connections, and let me show you what I can do for you. And really knowing your neighborhoods, you know, knowing the streets, knowing the houses, being able to give them background. You know, if I drive by a house, and half the time I'm looking at these houses and I'm like, oh yeah, I know a thing for numbers. So I'll memorize the address. I'm like, yeah, I've sold this house 2 times or 3 times before. And, you know, and I can go back and show them. If I have old photos, I'll show them how it's, you know, had a metamorphosis over the years, and you can see what people have done and kind of track that stuff. But it's providing valuable information and creating a communication schedule with the buyer, the seller, so that you are on top of it. Because when the market's not so hot, people were, you know, we had listings that were sitting there, and I was like the worst agent, you know, in my mind, because I'm like, oh God, I think I talked to them like a week ago. And then I keep a showing log, I keep a you know, a dialogue log, so I know when I've talked to clients every Monday. If I have a listing that's not selling right away, which I haven't done this lately, but every Monday is my client communication day. So when we used to have open houses or showings over the weekend, every single Monday, I would make an effort to connect with that seller or buyer as well, because buyers can sit there waiting on the screen for a new listing to come up. And it's very difficult because most of them are finding out about the properties before the agent, you know, before you know about it. So then you have to tell them, explain to them why you're setting them up on the search field. Basically, I tell people, I want you to be the first point of contact when this listing comes on the market, so that you're seeing it the second it comes on. And if you happen to be looking at your computer at midnight and I'm asleep, you know, shoot me an email or give me a call in the morning, and we'll talk about whatever's coming up, and I'll run out and look at it. I've done a lot of videos for people that can't get out of the house or they're stuck at home with their kids. I've done a lot of sort of, even though it's all online, I'll go over there and do like a Facebook time with them, or do a little personal video, which I try to narrate and send to them. And so if there's something particularly good or bad about a property, like, hey, oh, look, it doesn't show you in the photos, it backs up to an office building, or, you know, there's a gas station 2 doors away, or whatever it is, important factors that might influence their decision to either look at the house or not look at the house. I invite people to do that on my listings, and I think it's great. You know, we're starting to see more of that, because by the time somebody gets in the front door, it feels like a second showing to me these days with COVID, because there's so many of the Matterport tours and all the stuff that I do for my listings online. I want people to feel like when they come through the door, it's almost like the second time they've been in the house.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love it, dude. So then, all right, let's rewind the clocks here.
Sure.
So you jump into this while you're in college. So you're at UCLA.
Yep. Right.
You decided to get your real estate license. Yeah, I'm always really intrigued in our guest journeys, like, I mean, how this began in the first place. You know, like, why real estate? What happened at that point that drew you to real estate? I mean, how did you know, that this was for you? Because obviously you had other plans going to UCLA, because you don't need to go to UCLA to be a realtor, right? So how did this all come about, man?
So I jumped in early into that world because my parents redid apartment buildings. They bought and sold apartment buildings. Nobody was doing that as a sideline, but my mom was super talented. She would be on a ladder, stripping wallpaper, and she'd pick up day laborers on the street. I mean, it was crazy. Everyone thought she was nuts, but she would try to find the cheapest labor she could, and she did half the stuff herself. She had a contractor, handyman that would help. But I saw that going, and I would see she worked with a couple guys that were a couple who were realtors, And I became like at 14, 15 years old, I was their house sitter. I was, mowing their lawn. I was doing anything to make extra money. But I saw these guys and I said, this guy's driving a Mercedes convertible. They're always in Hawaii. And, as shallow as it sounds, I'm like, I want to do what these guys are doing. What are they doing? So I said, I always like cars and houses. And I figured, well, I wasn't going to make any money selling cars. So I started going into open houses. Like as soon as I had a car, I was 16, I would drive around and follow open house signs. I just kind of was fascinated with, peeking into other people's lives and seeing houses. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. Even though I was a poli-sci major at UCLA, initially thought I might go to law school. And then when I had a roommate at the time who was going through law school that was a year older, and I saw all the books and I'm like, I'm done with these books. I don't want to read these stacks of books and be up till midnight. And I'm done with the studying. I've done the whole thing. So I just thought that I finished school and kind of drifted towards the real estate angle. I bought a house in college. Everybody thought I was crazy. I bought a house in what wasn't one of the nicest neighborhoods at the time. And everybody was like living in their expensive apartments in Westwood, right near the campus. And I bought a house, that was a total fixer, fixed it up myself. And, I remember my first house, I paid, I think 89,000. I lived there a year and a half, just did cosmetics, on the thing. And maybe 2 years we were there. And I think I sold that for 189 and thought I had hit a jackpot, probably put 20,000 into it and made what I thought was an incredible amount of money, and sold that house, bought another one. And so I did several fixers along the way until the market changed in the 90s and I got caught with one and high interest rates and a $6,000 a month mortgage because I borrowed against it to fix up the house. And I ended up selling it, losing probably several $100,000, and that was all right before the earthquake in Los Angeles. It was in the early 90s. So I was like flying high as a late 20 something, guy driving my fancy Mercedes and fixing up my house in the great neighborhood and putting walls and gates on. And I thought this was, I'm really, really going. Then the market just disintegrated in the 1990, 91. And I went from doing great to that being my only bad year in real estate. Was the transitional year for me, was 1991. So that was I think I sold 3 houses that year. It was just very depressing. I'd never had that kind of turn in the market yet. And I didn't know how to deal with it. And I had listings that weren't selling and nobody wanted to buy anything. And it was a very depressing time. But what happened in LA was we had the earthquake in January 94, which was horrific, but it ended up starting the marketplace. Because basically when you look at the stats in our area as of that earthquake, which was kind of the bottom of the market, 1992, bottom of the market, we had over 25,000 listings on the market in our market area. And today we have less than 1,000. So it's everything just like we're down. I mean, I remember my original office, they threw a party when interest rates went below 10%. Everybody was so excited because when I got into the game, it was like 15, 16% interest. I mean, nobody could afford anything.
Yeah.
It was nuts. So it's a whole different ballgame. But I think now people are complaining if, the interest rate goes to 3%, they're complaining. But those interest rates and the lack of inventory, I think in most of our marketplaces with people that are listening, and that's what's fueling the marketplace. So any one of those factors changes, we may have, something new on the horizon. But when this COVID thing hit and we started a call with local brokers, like high-end, top-end brokers in my market area, we started a call with about 70 agents, and we would get on every Saturday morning early just to discuss how people were dealing with the early versions of COVID. And then everybody just got too busy and that call fell apart. But it was very interesting to do that for a few months, because in the beginning, all the agents, I think without exception, everybody thought this is game over. The market's going to crash. Nobody's going to buy anything. The economy is going to explode. And then there was really that sort of March to April window where things were really unsure. And then I think really for my marketplace, by the end of April, beginning of May, everything just exploded. And the comps, every house that sells even today is the next comp. So when people are asking for comps, it's like I had one in a neighborhood that comped out at about 950,000 to $1 million range, a fixer on a big lot in the area called Woodland Hills. And I went over there and it was a trust sale with three brothers. I go over there and we put it on the market for $995. 3 doors away, there's the bigger version of the same house that's in escrow for 1.2 and half remodeled. So we put ours on for $995. I have 16 offers. It's an escrow for $1,210,000, not a comp in sight, but with a 50% down buyer and a young kid, you know, in his 20s, you know, wants to buy it and fix it up and make it mid-century cool, you know. So but there's not a comp in sight. But as we've gone into escrow, other things have come on. They've all sold for similar ranges. So we're kind of in all these marketplaces, I think, especially in these high-end neighborhoods, but even in the lower end ones, every house that's selling, you're now creating the new comp. So when people ask for comps, I have clients, buyer clients, who are absolutely shocked that a house that they looked at, you know, in October is now, you know, worth 100 or 200,000 more than it was less than 6 months ago. And they just don't understand. I'm like, that's the inventory. People, there's so many people waiting to pay that there's always the pregnant wife or the person that has a absolute need to buy, and they're tired of losing houses. They're gonna pay the extra if they can afford it to just be done. It's like, you know, look at what is it gonna take to do this? It's like somebody sent me a text the other day that was a joke, but it said, this is my new offer technique. I just send a blank offer over to the listing agent signed by my client. It says, please fill this crap out because I'm tired of losing houses. Just fill in what they want and sign it and send it back to me.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, obviously you wouldn't do that, but we've all thought about that because, yeah, with the buyers I've had several buyers with 7, 8 houses. We make offers on, we make them way over asking. We're 25, 30% down. We remove appraisal contingency. And in our marketplace, there's a lot of all cash buyers that are either getting parental family assistance or they're coming out of a high roller, you know, condo or a smaller house that's gone up so much in value. They're just rolling their equity into the next one. And if they really need to buy something, you know, people are ready to do it. They're ready to spend the extra money. Where I don't think that was the case, you know, obviously a year ago, but even, you know, as this year took off, even after the New Year's, people were realizing, hey, COVID's going to be around for a while. We're working around it. But those people that wanted and could afford more are out in force.
Yeah. So then with that being said, you know, I mean, I can't even tell you how many times a day, half a dozen plus, that I'm getting reached out to of, I mean, the common thing is, how do I get more listings? I'm tired of working with all these buyers, you know, right? And you know, I'm like, I mean, that's everybody, you know, right? And I'm telling them, I'm like, you know, not to necessarily go try to focus on getting more listings, but I'm like, even the top of the top in this industry that I'm speaking with, everybody is in that same boat, you know, right? Like, you're struggling to get in a week what you used to list in a month or whatever, you know, right? So, but then from there, when it comes to, I don't know, because, you know, we were talking off air before we started this, how your business really flipped last year from the like used to be listing heavy, the majority of your business. And then last year it just through all this, like everybody else, pretty much, we've had a switch where it's much more buyer centric and you know, portion of our business. And, you know, that being said though, like what are you doing to eventually have that success with your clients? Like you mentioned, sometimes it's 8 offers, getting beat out 8 times. And, you know, right. So there's, you know, not just the writing the offers, which sometimes there's only so much we can do there, but then also we got, you know, managing, I guess, the buyer's emotions and keeping him in the game and keeping him committed. I mean, what are some of the, you know, the things that are working well for you and advice that you would give to agents, you know, to have success with eventually getting some of these buyers closed?
Yeah, the buyer part is tricky. I think it's all about upfront education with the buyers, because these buyers think you just find a house, you make an offer and it sells. You know, in our marketplace, if the house is priced anywhere close to what it should be in any condition, it's likely to have multiple offers. So I think you need to educate the buyer up front to say, hey, look, a lot of times this asking price is a starting price. So it isn't like how much less can you offer, particularly in that first week on the market. But I tell them it's a case-by-case basis. So part of my job is what I do is I will actually pick up the phone and call the agent and say, you know, hey, can you just give me a little background? What is your seller expectation? Is there anything that your sellers are looking for, obviously outside of price, that could influence our deal? Do they need to stay in the house? Are they building a house? Are they moving out of state? Where are they going? Is their house ready? Because I've gotten a lot of deals. Like I got one put through for sellers of mine where I gave this same information to a good agent who I've known for years. And she came in and I said, look, they don't have anywhere to go. They're nervous. They're not going to find a house. I said, so they're very obviously price focused, but they're also focused on time. So if your client doesn't have to be in right away, what would they like? They would like a short close and a lengthy rent back at a great price. And it's a multiple offer. So she wrote an offer right out of the box. And this was a house that was $1,399,000. And I thought it was worth $1 million, probably $1,425,000. She comes right out of the box and she writes $1,535,000. I mean, way over the asking. Free month. Seller can stay for a month for $1, and then they have the right to stay an additional 3 months at the buyer's PITI. So it gave my clients a 30-day escrow and basically a 4-month window to find a house. The sad part is that window is up in 3 weeks and we still don't have a house for them, but they're going to move into a lease temporarily, but they're totally fine with it because they completely maxed out on their price. But by that agent asking me that question, I was able to give her as much background information on the seller as I could and tell her what I think was going to work. And those buyers really wanted a house. They were in an apartment with a baby and they weren't in a rush to be in. So it worked out great. But I think there's price key obviously is paramount to most of these sellers, but I think you've got to find out what other issues are important. Because if somebody writes a great offer, but they want to be in 3 weeks or 4 weeks and that seller's not ready to move for months, they're probably not going to take that deal. So a lot of times it's terms other than price that can influence these deals. But I also educate the buyers and tell them, look, it is highly likely that you're not going to get the first house you make an offer on unless all the stars align in the perfect scenario. So be prepared that we're going to give it as best of a try as we can at the best price. And I always try to engage the other agent, on the listing side when I represent buyers to really just find out, hey, what are your offers looking like? Can you give me a clue? Because I don't want to waste your time. I never say my time, but I don't want to waste your time. If my buyer's completely out of the picture, then, we don't need to jump in on this. And usually they'll be honest and they'll say, no, if somebody wrote full price and somebody wrote a little bit over, but this one's contingent on a house selling. And if you've got a really clean buyer coming in, call that agent and find out as much as you can about not only the agent, but that seller and what their needs are, and try to structure your offer to meet the seller's needs as much as you can. People removing appraisal contingencies and loan contingencies. We're getting a lot of that, which is a very aggressive maneuver that I wouldn't suggest anybody doing without your buyer, talking to their lender. But if they're in a position to remove appraisal contingency, sometimes that, obviously we all know you still have the loan contingency in there. So in that case, a lot of people are removing appraisal contingencies in the fear that the seller thinks the property is not going to appraise, when in reality, you could back out on your loan contingency if it doesn't appraise. So it's a partial, it's a feel good thing for the listing agent. I get it when I get it on mine, but sometimes I've gotten deals where I've just removed the appraisal contingency and I tell my buyer, hey, it doesn't appraise and you don't want to buy the house or we can't work it out, you can still back out. You still got your loan contingency there. So you're covered. But that has gotten me many transactions last year just by removing the appraisal contingency, which a lot of buyers freak out. But basically I call the buyer contract, especially in California, our contract basically is like a free look subject to the cost of your inspections, and you don't even need a reason to back out. You can just say you change your mind. So it's not anybody's intention, but I think when you educate the buyers to let them know that, hey, look, people say, oh my God, we signed the offer and I laid awake all night last night. And I said, why? You can back out. There's 500 reasons that you can back out scot-free and get your deposit back. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about it until you sign that removal of all contingencies. That's when you can lay awake.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the listing end, I'll tell you, back to the listing side, one of the best things I ever did was I collect and I save the name of every agent who's ever sold a listing of mine. And then because this is so many years into it, we go through at the end of every year and we'll call the people out that are retired, dead, moved out of state, whatever. We call them down, but I have about a 10,000 person list. And anytime I meet somebody or get their email, I add them onto the list, whether it be a new seller, upcoming buyer. And then I have a weekly newsletter that I put out with like informative articles, things that are going on in the neighborhood. Some of that stuff you can pull from other sites, but I'll write a couple and I have people that contribute to it as well. And then like all through COVID, I've been doing like a series called Home Is, and it's basically home is where the heart is, home is where you know, the family comes together and we have a different theme every week. And basically it's kind of a feel good thing, sort of a motivational message without getting too preachy to people. And that has gotten such massive, I've had agents call me saying, I just love your newsletter from other companies. And like, I send it to all my clients. I'm like, perfect. It's the best market. I have agents sending it to their clients. I'm like, not a problem. That sounds great to me. Oh, my client wanted to see the article. And I've actually, you know, not that I'm trying to steal somebody's client, but I've actually had, you know, people that were working with other clients or people who bought listings of mine years ago and they're ready to move and their agent didn't keep in touch with them, which is another important topic. Their agent didn't keep in touch with them. And I very often get called back to a listing I've sold before by the buyer of that house saying, hey, you know, our agent, you know, disappeared, or we haven't talked to him in 5 years and we're moving, you know, to New York, Arizona, wherever. And, you know, you did such a great job when you sold the house, we'd like you to sell it for us, you know. Or my favorite one I get all the time is, we thought you did a much better job representing your seller than our agent did representing us. I get that all the time. I'm very discreet about it, but I'm like, okay, not a problem. You know, if it's a friend of mine or somebody I work closely with, I would actually call that agent and say, hey, I think your people are going to move. You should talk to them. Or I've worked out a referral basis if that agent is not in contact with them anymore. I don't like to jump people's listings or that kind of thing. I'm real careful with that. But that newsletter I started putting in, and I put it out, started it before COVID. That has created such a thing that I get calls from Canada, Spain. Other agents will email me and comment saying, oh, great article. Where'd you get this article? Or that was so amazing. You know, it's like, so I'm getting incredible feedback, and I can trace probably a dozen listings to that newsletter and probably at least a dozen buyers that have come, you know, in the last, I would say, year and a half. Strictly, I can say to that. It keeps me in touch because I have all my past clients, past agents I've worked with, current people that are thinking about selling or thinking about buying. I keep them on the list, and it helps me to keep in touch with them because we do it every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. Click. We have it done. It goes out to everybody. And then it's funny, the comments come in. So my assistant will save the good ones, you know, for me to look at, or she'll respond as me, you know, to the basic ones. But it's great to have that kind of a connection with people once you get the system in place, it's not a tremendous amount of effort. And this is not something that you have to spend giant advertising dollars on. This is already my built-in base. So what I suggest people do is, like, you meet someone. It used to be an open house kind of thing. Like, people didn't want to give their phone number, so I'd ask for their email, and then I boom, put them on my list, and they'd get an email from me. Not offensive. You can unsubscribe. I even get comments where people say, God, I keep thinking about unsubscribing, but then I just want to see what you're going to talk about next week.
Yeah,
which is great. But yeah, communication is a key, because I was the worst in keeping in touch with past clients. When you get busy is, I think, one of the hardest things to do. So people with this downtime, I mean, if you're a new agent, you know, go to your social sphere where people aren't meeting socially, if at all today, but go to your social sphere, you know, shoot them an email, pick up the phone, call them, make arrangements to go to an outside lunch or something, take people to lunch, do some simple thing, just reconnect with your past, even friends, clients, associates, all your religious social groups, anything where people aren't actually meeting in person in most cases. But that connection just reminds people that you're around. And you don't even have to talk about real estate. Just say, hey, I'm just calling to check in to see how you're doing. Don't give the hard sell, and just let them talk. Sometimes that person's happened to me. Yeah, I thought about you, and we were thinking about, you know, selling our condo or getting a bigger house or downsizing, what have you. They'll bring it up if they're interested. It doesn't hurt to remind people what you do for a living at any time. But I think just calling people to check in and say, hello, I'm thinking about you. One of my biggest high impact thing was when COVID first happened. I went to every listing that I had and every listing that had closed escrow in the last year. And I brought people, depending on the price of the house, I brought them 1 or 2 bottles of decent wine with a roll of toilet paper on top. And I dropped it off in a wine bag at their front door, and then texted them or emailed and said, hey, there's a little surprise for you at the front door. People went ballistic. I mean, I'm talking about spending, you know, 10 or 15 or $20 on a decent bottle of wine and putting a roll of toilet paper as a joke on top when no one could get toilet paper. That was crazy. I had so many people. That is the coolest thing. That made my day. We're so depressed. We're stuck at home, and that wine was amazing, and the toilet paper, perfect. You know, it's like, it was kind of with my sense of humor, it worked out as a just to reach out to people. And I just put it in my trunk and did it myself. I don't care. I was like, during those early COVID days when nobody knew what was happening, I thought I got to do something to keep connections up. And that was a home run, smash hit for me.
Nah, so powerful, man. I was talking about this with some friends of mine that, all that are in this industry, but
Right.
when we were talking about the importance of, following up to our database or sphere of influence, and especially, through this time of COVID,
Right.
and like I told them, and I posed this question to them, like, throughout this time, I haven't had one person, at least that I'm aware of, that's reached out to me, as far as like my attorney, my CPA, my, people that I've, like that same relationship, like us being their realtor, that professional relationship, if you will, that's reached out to me. That was like, hey, Josh, how are you and the family doing? Just want to reach out, make sure you guys are okay, checking in. And look, I get it. They're worried about their own family, their own business. Everybody's freaking out. But I'm like, it's such a powerful time because people are hurting mentally, financially, whatever. And nobody's really reaching out. And those small things, right, go such a long way.
Even bringing up, like, if you need an excuse, or some people are better with that than others, but even making a connection with a lender that you use that can print out an interest rate chart. Because some of these people are like lost in the COVID fog, and you say, hey, I know you guys haven't refinanced, or have you refinanced? None of my business, but I just thought I'd bring this, to your attention, that I had a couple clients that just refinanced, and these were the interest rates they got. And it may be something you want to check into, because what's better than saving money on your payments? So if you haven't looked into it, I have a great relationship with this guy or that guy. Give them a couple of referrals and send that out to them. And sometimes people will get thinking about that and say, do you realize how much your purchasing power, how far it can go today? And your house might be worth more than you thought, because forget about your Zillow comps. It may actually be worth a lot more than whatever's showing up online. And if that's the case, it's a great time to make a move up in this market, because we can get crazy money for your house, and hopefully we can find you something else. But kind of introing that kind of thing, where you're not forcing yourself on people, but just sort of putting it out there, because people love to talk about themselves, especially in this COVID time. So people are bored and they like a change of pace. So I think that the conversation starts with, hey, I'm just checking to see how you're doing. Isn't this been a crazy last year? Let me tell you about some things that are going on, whether you bring up interest rates, whether, how's the family, how's the baby, whatever. Just try to keep it not real estate focused, so you don't feel like you're coming in like a bomb just simply after their business. Do the personal touch first, and then kind of work up to the potential business angle.
Yeah. And, and again, I don't, these are just, this is just a stat I heard. I don't know if it's true or not, but like suicide rates or hotlines being up,
right,
100% during this time. And, and again, man, people are hurting and lonely. I think people don't really understand the full power of even if it's not anything, over the top, just hey, how are you doing? Right? Like, just the fact that you thought of them, took a few minutes out of your day to call them and check in on them. And
I think it's so powerful. I've done things like where I've had clients that I know are stuck at home with the Zoom school with the kids and stuff. And so I'll go to like one of the local pizza places, and I'll have a pizza delivered. How much does that cost? That's not a crazy investment, but you just, send it over in the middle of the day. People, that's the kind of thing that people can warm up. It doesn't have to be, it's not going to go bad. But obviously you want to make sure they're home, but that's the kind of thing. Have a pizza delivered, send dinner to somebody who's, stuck at home with their kids or something. And you don't have to spend a fortune, but the impact of that kind of a thing is massive, because that's telling you that someone thought of you. I've sent people little, Girl Scout cookie deliveries. I was doing a little bit of that with we had a great 8-year-old girl in my neighborhood who I don't even know, passed a flyer out in the mailbox, 8 years old. I thought this was brilliant, saying, hey, because of COVID, we're not allowed to sell our cookies at the market, but take a picture of this QR code on the phone. And she had a little drawing of herself with the Girl Scout cookies, and here's what I'm doing, and this is what I'm raising the money for. And, I'd love your help. And if you want to donate them to the troops or whatever, just click on this QR code on your phone. She's 8 years old. Click on the QR code and you pop it up, and it says, thank you for visiting Emily's website. Here's basic, simple, clean, easy marketing. I'm like, obviously the parents helped her, but I'm like, this girl's brilliant. I mean, she's on fire. So now she sold like just in the neighborhood, like 500-600 boxes of cookies from this flyer she dropped off in people's mailbox for free. So it's like, there's a lot of free marketing out there.
Yeah. Well, and if you put this all in context,
Yeah.
right, of the power of the things that you're talking about, because this was something that you talked about off air, but I want to make sure all of our listeners and those watching, listen to this, know this, but even amongst all this craziness, 2020 last year was your second best production year out of your whole entire 35+ year career. So, I mean, these things obviously are working and, crushing it. And, because also you've done over $2 billion in sales and I mean, that's having your second best, highest producing year. That's not a small feat by any means with your production. And, I'm curious to kind of circle back to that newsletter. Because, especially with your higher price point, your higher commissions in your market,
right?
That's like in that 18-month period, I mean, that's like $1 million newsletter, right? If you
100%, yeah.
So it sounded like that was really something that was to build up this agent relationship kind of network and stay in touch with agents. Have you also expanded that with all this feedback where now you're adding that to clients, past clients, and so forth, or is it just strictly for realtors?
No, it's everybody. It's basically, I put it out for everybody. What it also spawns is realtors will call me from that newsletter or email and say, oh, great article. By the way, I've got a client looking for this or that. Do you have anything coming up? Blah, blah, blah. Because we're not, obviously with the new clear cooperation policies and stuff, we can't do as much of this pocket listing stuff. But if someone reaches out and asks you, in an email, do you have something coming up? And so I've sold several off markets of listings during this time for the people that wanted to do that, really from that newsletter and people reaching out and saying, hey, I'm looking for this or looking for that kind of thing. It just reminds them to check in with you, like, or they'll say, hey, do you have somebody for this? Because I have something coming up. And so I've actually sold at least 2 or 3 houses from that feedback from people, agents saying, I've got something coming up. And I said, I've got a buyer for that. Can I show it? And they were nice, simple, quiet off-market deals, at full value, but we didn't have to go through the multiple offer dance and all the craziness that goes with that. So it's been all across the board. I just think communicating, I'm a big fan of my reputation and keeping that intact with the agents as well as the public. So agents respect me very much, which that's the number one most important thing to me. So that when you're on the other side of the text, the phone, the email, they know who they're dealing with, and they know that people will say when they're showing my listings, they'll be like, oh, Andrew's great to be in escrow with. Like, if you like this house, I'd rather, sell this house than so-and-so agent's house because he's going to be a lot easier to work with. So it's part of the full package where I think these agents today and even before COVID, a lot of these listing agents and some of the buying agents, the egos were so enormous, they were larger than the entire transaction. So I think the high ego agents get in the way of so many deals. I call them the my people agents. My people won't even look at that offer. My people are not going to do this. I'm like, really? Why don't you ask them and then have them respond back to us? And if they really say no, then that's a no. But my other philosophy is always ask 3 times. I learned this from a client who's a billionaire, and I've tried this for the last 15 years. And as crazy as it sounds, it's a great tip for people. It's like, if you really want something, always ask for it 3 times. So he told me this. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, yeah, you go to a restaurant, you want a steak. Oh, we're out of steak. Are you sure you're out of steak? Could you just go back and check in the kitchen, do me a favor? Because, usually the chef always saves the steak for himself or whatever. There might be something that he's, oh yeah, I went back there, he's, not again. And then I always say, could you ask just one more time? Oh my God, it's amazing. They do have a steak back there. Like he was going to do. I have done that same thing with buyers. Like when you have a buyer, but the philosophy goes like, would your client consider X offer? Nope, they wouldn't consider it. Don't even bother writing it. For these houses that are lingering on the market, I will follow up and I'll call the next week. Hey, my buyer's still interested in that house. Has your seller, done any thinking about that? And do you think it's time? Should we just write this offer? No. And then the third time I call, almost without exception, like, you know what, you probably should just put it in writing because they found something they like now out of state. And I think they might be a little more motivated. So if I had let that first call just go as a flat no, I would have never pursued it. But I always try 3 times and it doesn't work all the time, but it's amazing how many times that sort of cautious and polite calls like that will get you a persistent but a dedicated response. So that's been, I thank him all the time. I'm like, that was the most amazing thing, because that's like part of my life philosophy. Always ask 3 times before you take the hard no.
I love that. I love it, man. So, I'm curious with, okay, 35 years in this space, and you talked about the early 90s, that huge crash, and then again, I mean, after that we had, again, the dot-com bubble, then we had 9/11, then we had the Great Recession, and now we've got this crazy, COVID stuff going on, and it could have been other, things in between there too, of ups, downs, and, so forth. What has been the key to continue to just adapt and reinvent yourself, and to not just survive during these market shifts? Because a lot of people, they become extinct and can't even survive in this space, but that's allowed you to continue to thrive in these times. Like what would you say is the key? And for those watching, listening, for them to be prepared, so if anybody's really been in the business, let's just say, pre or post 2012, that hasn't really experienced even a normal market, right? What does that look like? What how can others go out there and be able to make these shifts and adapt and continue to thrive for a long career like you've been able to do?
It's tricky, because the first, before the pivot word became so popular, I mean, I remember myself sitting at an open house as a young realtor, like, I think it was in like summer 1990, hot as hell. And I'm sitting on this house, and it was like my 3rd Sunday open house in a row. And I'm like, I was used to things in the late 80s when I started. It's like, you put it out, your multiple offers the first week. It was like today with less paperwork, but it was, we'd go out there, and I was like, this is my 3rd Sunday. I'm like, no one's showing up. Nothing's happening. It was just when the news articles and the financial world was starting to unravel, but I wasn't as in touch with the news cycle as people are today. And I was like, I didn't get what was happening. And I'm sitting there, nobody comes into my open house. And it took me a while to realize, it took me a year to pivot from that, because when 91 hit, and my income just probably went, 75% down in 1 year, but your expenses, funnily enough, don't adjust accordingly. So I'm like underwater, borrowing against credit cards. It's like I put all this money into a house that I was losing money on top of it. So I was so depressed and so down at that time. And I thought, what am I going to do to like reinvent myself? So I decided, hey, I need to get into relocation. So at that time, I pitched through our company at the time, through the relocation people. I said, hey, I need to start working with some buyers that like have a reason to move and have to buy something because they're relocating from another state or city. So I got heavy into relocation at the bottom of the market, looking for that, trying to find some buyers there, because nobody was really coming to open houses when the market was dead. People would come in, and I remember going into people's houses, which sounds foreign to newer agents today who haven't experienced it, but I used to talk about pricing your property ahead of the marketplace by making it lower before the market went down. So I said, look, we're tracking this. It's going down 1 or 2% a month. So I would go in and say, hey, here's your value today, but I think we need to price you 5% under today's value so that you look appealing to somebody a month or 2 from now, because this house isn't going to sell the first day. So nothing that people are worrying about today, but I think where most people are pivoting in this marketplace, back to your earlier question, was for newer agents. I think 100% the name of the game is listings. But if you don't have any listings, there's nothing wrong with having a good buyer. It's just really, you're in for the long haul. I mean, it used to be when inventory was plentiful and the market was lower, having buyers was great, if they were realistic buyers, because hey, you had a laundry list of stuff to pick from, and you would just go around making low offers on things until somebody took it. Now you're making these crazy offers on things, and with 12 offers or 15 offers, and you don't get the property. It's tough. But I think using your social sphere, to look for influences. I tell people to go back to, I go back to my UCLA alumni people. I'm in a group there, and I will get referrals from that. I go back to, I worked for a law firm in college, and befriended one of the secretaries in the law firm. And it turned out her husband was like a huge business manager. And he's probably that's the house in Woodland Hills I'm selling today was his parents' house. But I've done, millions and millions of dollars of business with this guy, where I started out with condos and small things he would test me with. He did a lot of, big name entertainment people, but I always get like, oh, their housekeeper is looking to buy a little house in Van Nuys, for 150,000, and I would be like, no problem, I'm your guy, and then all of a sudden they'd be like, hey, well, now their daughter wants to buy a house, and then now all of a sudden they want to sell their house in Sherman Oaks for $1 million or whatever it was at the time. So I kind of climbed that ladder, but he's referred me. That went so far as my big hit was I sold a house. My most expensive house I ever sold was I sold a house to Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith. And everybody's like, oh my God, you're so lucky. I said, I know, I'm so lucky. It only took 2.5 years. And they would call me, very nice, but they would call me at, like, their assistant would call it at 8 a.m. on a Sunday saying, hey, Will and Jada have the day open and they'd like to go out and look at property starting at 10. I'm like, and at the time they were looking at houses priced between like $7 and $15 million. I'm like, you don't just show up on a Sunday at these houses, we're going back 20 years, but I said, you don't go back and they're still in the same place, but you don't go back 20 years and say half of these were horse properties and ranches. And so we finally figured out the house that I ended up selling them. The people had, it was Bobby Vinton, the old time singer, it was his place, big ranch, like 100-acre ranch out in Malibu, Calabasas area. So we rented that house. I was over mileage on my car lease because it was 28 miles from my office to get to that house. And they went back to that house 15 times during the escrow process, 15 times. So I would say it was, 60 miles round trip, 15 times. The lease, I think it cost me some money on the lease, but I developed a relationship with them and their connections where I've ended up, selling the daughter a house. I leased, the son and daughter a house. That they tore the house down, bought another house to live in while they were building a new house. Then now they've been there so long, they moved out, at least in my house in Malibu on the beach last summer for absolutely crazy amount of money. And now they're looking for a beach house. So it's like, it continues into long-term relationships with these clients, and they're with the same business manager, which is, unusual. It's like, that's the goal when you deal with Hollywood and business managers, is you usually don't survive the client if the client changes business managers, because that manager has their own agents that they like to work with. But I have a couple of good producer clients that I've survived through two or three business managers, which is a giant feat, because if you can cross that bridge and prove yourself to different people, those are the people who are the ones you really want to get the business from. So whether it's, even in people in other parts of the country where you're not dealing with entertainment and business managers, there's always going to be attorneys, CPAs, and that's a great reach out to those people to try to, cultivate some business with them, and say, if you have anybody who's, looking to move up or move down or move out of state, I always offer that service of doing a free CMA, or a lot of people, if you know somebody where the spouse has passed away, call up and offer to do a DOD, a date of death appraisal for the accountant, or offer that service to an accountant or CPA, say, hey, I do this for free, no charge. And when you start doing a few of those, they'll remember, and that letter, you do it on your own letterhead, is in their file. So when they pass away, or the kids decide it's time for mom to move to a smaller place, or somebody goes to assisted living, your letter is in their file with your number and address and contact information. Guaranteed you've got a pretty strong shot that they're going to call you when it's time for that property to be sold. So I'm thinking long-term all the time. So I think a lot of the newer agents are thinking like, what are we doing this week? I'm thinking about next year and the years ahead, because if I throw enough of that future stuff out there, what happens is the future becomes the present very fast.
Yeah, man. I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but to kind of summarize that, I mean, it sounds like, you free your ability to keep, like I said, thriving and growing through all these different changes for multiple decades, and, all the different crazy markets that you've seen and so forth. It's always being proactive, identifying where the business is at, right? Because like real estate's always trading hands. So like you talked about, like, okay, open houses aren't working, buyers aren't, I got to go to this. Where are the clients? Well, through relocation companies, or, right, through the business managers, through these attorneys, right? And being proactive of where the business is, or where is it going to be. And then, as you talked about a lot in this interview, of just going above and beyond and solidifying those deep relationships and, you know, making sure that you're taking care of your clients and so forth. And of course, staying in touch after the fact and, you know, right.
That's
You
the
know,
hardest thing. Cause it's like you feel like when you get in, whether you have a buyer or a seller, it's literally, I describe it to clients and to other agents, that you are literally moving into these people's lives for the duration. And it's almost like a little bit of a separation anxiety when that escrow closes. I've even had clients call like, you mean you're not going to call us every day anymore? Can you, like, they asked you to call them. It's like, oh, that's great. So then, no, I'm going to call you and check in with you. And I always try to do that, especially when somebody first moves into a house, or if a seller has moved out of state or to another house. I'll always make a point to follow up, see how they're settling in, and maybe put them on a 6-month, at least minimum checklist where you should, people that don't have a ton of business and you're not that busy, but you're wondering what to do, you should be spending your time contacting your sphere of influence, and just, whether that be email, phone call, text, whatever, that I think is the most important thing, because someone is always meeting another realtor, someone's relative just got their license. You know, I always encourage people, you know, what a good idea it is not to work with friends and family. And I'll even have other agents say, hey, I'll, you know, work on a referral basis with you. Or in some cases, I've even split listings with people where the family was like, hey, we want to be able to yell at somebody, and we don't want to yell at Sheila. We want to yell at you. You know, we want somebody, a point of contact that's not family or our very close friend, because we don't want to damage that relationship. So I've actually kind of friendly inserted myself into some of those transactions by offering the agent, hey, why don't we split the listing? Why don't we, let's do it. I'll do all the work. You know, you can handle the family on this end, and I'll be your touchstone, you know, here. So it kind of gets your foot in the door. Guaranteed, when you have a listing, in my mind, in every neighborhood, whenever somebody sells a house, within 6 months to a year, somebody else within 2 blocks is going to sell their house. So it's like really following up with, when you get those listings, following up with the neighbors, making sure everybody knows that you sold that house, whether that be a postcard, or even people that want to spend the mailing budget, do like the Girl Scout did and print out a little flyer and said, hey, just want to let you know how excited I am. There's a new family moving into your neighborhood. You know, if you get their permission, and you can do a little picture of them and say, hey, you know, the Joneses have just moved into this new address, and we want to welcome them to the neighborhood. And I was honored to help them with this transaction. You know, if you have a friend or anybody you think that might be selling, I've got other clients who are looking to move into the neighborhood. You know, here you go. Free flyer in the mailbox or on their front door. It doesn't cost you anything, and you've got a potential lead.
Yeah, love that. Love that. So, you know, I know that none of us have a crystal ball, and this might be a question that, you know, like I know I don't necessarily like getting this question because again, it's, you know, we don't always know. However, though, with all of your experience and so forth, I mean, where do you see this? I mean, the market's so crazy, and interest rates can only stay so low for so long. And earlier, when we first kind of kicked off this interview, you talked about, you know, hey, if when low inventory changes or interest rates change, one of those things that is going to, you know, create some type of a disruption or a shift in the marketplace. And, you know, and for me, I just, and look, I'm in an area here in Phoenix, Arizona. It's in more of an affordable area, but it's like, we don't have a lot of celebrities and, you know, or I mean, the average household income, like in the city I'm in right now, is like 85,000. But these people are going out there and buying $400,000 homes. I'm like, how can they afford it? And I get with the interest rates and figuring out a way, but I'm like, this can't last. You know, one of Newton's laws of physics is, you know, every action is followed by an equal and opposite reaction. And it's, you know, man, it's, and there's a lot of different camps on this, you know, and whether it's even a prediction that you might have of if and when and where this thing is going, you know, and, or maybe things to look out for of, hey, if these things take and happen, here's what to pay attention to, so you can kind of be prepared to pivot or whatever. You know, I mean, what's your 2 cents on all of that?
You know, I think I've personally thought that the market was going to change, you know, for the last 3 or 4 years, because usually in our marketplace and really pretty much throughout the country, things tend to run in 7 to 10 year cycles. And if you look at the history of all of our boards of realtors, you know, people will say, oh my God, it had the dip and the valley. But if you look at the history, it's a it's a roller coaster climbing uphill that has little hills and valleys along the way. But when you look at a 50-year span, it just looks like a line going straight up. But what happens is nobody knows when the market's changing until it's already changed. And people would ask all the time, oh, is the market, should I wait to buy next year? And I said, or people, I love it. In my local area, I can't even go to the market without like 10 people wanting to talk to me about real estate, which is not that that's bad, but I love that you get the classic question all the time. How's the market? So no matter what, the market's always great. Market's always great. So I'm like, and so I always ask them, what's my house worth? And then I always say, oh, are you thinking of selling? No, we're never going to sell. I said, oh, then it's really worth whatever you want. If you're not selling, it's worth whatever you think it is right now. But I think, dealing with these changes, I found the only way to really adapt to these changes is just be cognizant, knowing that in this current cycle that we're in, if these interest rates, even in the neighborhoods that you're talking about in average parts of the country, because I do all price ranges. It's like last year I sold a piece of land for 80,000. And I think my most expensive, sale was like $5 million. But, my average price point is probably more in the low millions, but my price point has gone up every year. But, when I was first selling houses in the 80s, it's like my first sale was like 190,000. I thought, oh my God, this is huge. This is like one of the top, most expensive sales in the office that week at 190,000. But, when you're pivoting with these changes in time, it's really the interest rates and the inventory. Right now, I think they go hand in hand. If there's any appreciable change in that inventory, I think the only thing on the horizon, and I think this is really, we're talking about the end of this year, I think we'll be pretty good this year. My prediction with the interest rates, and I think inventory will slowly increase this year. But we've got a lot of people that are in different parts of the country that are hurting, that aren't paying their mortgage, they can't pay their rent. We're very lucky in my area, and the people that I'm dealing with, for the most part, people are okay. But boy, in the big cities, and once you get out of the bigger cities and people don't have job security, and people are fighting with food security and kid security and all the problems that are out there, there are people that are really hurting. But with all the COVID forgiveness of rent and mortgages, they're sort of out there in the ether. Once that resolves itself and nobody's quite sure, I love the whole plan about, oh, you can forego your mortgage, but you still owe the money at the end. Well, who is going to have a year's worth of mortgage payments that they're suddenly going to be able to make up magically at the end of that year in any price range? Same with the renters. I think these renters, they're going to be like, hey, sue me, I'm going to move from California to Utah, and find me in Utah. It's like, I'm not paying the back rent. And we're going to have a lot of issues where I started in the lower markets. I got involved with Bank of America and several banks, and I was doing foreclosures, which was a new thing to me. But I pivoted again. I was like, well, I had friends that did it. I had a client that was an asset manager, luckily enough. And he, said, hey, you'd be good at this. And I got in a little bit too late on the foreclosure game, because it was already when that Countrywide merger came in, and it was just, so it was through Countrywide. So I had to survive the jump from Countrywide to Bank of America, which was a huge leap, because they all have their own people. And then they'd start assigning these random foreclosures, and we're talking about going back into, earlier 2000s and late 90s. They start signing, you get an email that says, hey, you've been assigned this foreclosure, and you could accept or reject, but you had minutes to decide, so that you'd have an alert on your phone. And then they'd be like, wait, I'm not going to South Central LA, and then all of a sudden it would be a condo in Marina Del Rey overlooking the ocean. It was 700,000. It would be a condo in Pacoima, that was 70,000, and a conversion building. So we'd have wild extremes. But I did about 80 or 90, foreclosures in that day, which was a hell of a lot of work. I'm grateful for the business when the market was down, but it was an amazing amount of work. I had one assistant at the time who since moved to New York, but he was like an expert at, getting up in the morning and calling these banks and filtering the offers and putting lock boxes and keys on and off. I have a couple of friends that are contacting the banks now, because they're gearing up for what could be a year from now, that there will absolutely be. There's always foreclosures in the marketplace. I think, for some of these newer agents that are, and me too, who are getting calls from clients, they're like, what about this one? It came out as a pre-foreclosure. That's another capture site where they just happen to note that somebody's behind on their mortgage payments. It's not in foreclosure. And most people have plenty of equity in their houses, in our area. So the foreclosures in our area are not going to be as frequent, because people will just sell their house, as long as the value is up and they have, large equity positions. Why would they let it go into foreclosure? They just sell it. But I think that marketplace is on the horizon to some degree, lesser probably in most of the neighborhoods that I'm working in, but I have agent friends that, were almost exclusive, wholesale lender foreclosure brokers that were doing, 2, 3, 4, 500 transactions a year with giant teams of assistants. And that was their full-time job. They're gearing up, they're reestablishing their connections with these banks because I've seen it happen multiple times over these cycles. So it's always going to happen again, but we're on borrowed time in this upcycle. And I think this COVID just sort of bought us another year or two of a great market, but I don't know what's going to happen, after the end of this year. I think the jury's out. I think it's going to remain to be seen, but I think there will be some changes after this year.
So with that being said, what do you tell a buyer that maybe is asking you if is now a good time to buy? Like maybe they don't need to buy right now, but they're like, hey, should we buy now or should we wait? Right? That can be kind of a tough one, right?
When I tell people, it's like I had clients that 4 years ago thought we were at the top of the market, sold their house, went into a lease or moved out of state, and now they either can't afford to come back or they can't afford to get back in the marketplace because they've blown through their equity and they're renting a nice house and they're living comfortably, but they've blown through their savings because they spent all the money that they made off of their house that they thought they were selling at the top of the market. And if they kept their house, it would be worth another 200,000 than it was, 3, 4 years ago. So I think I always tell people, look, it's always a good time to buy. These are unprecedented, never seen before interest rates, in my career and most people's. So the reality is the smart buyer today is not looking at the price of the house. They're looking at the payment and they're trying to say, what is it going to cost me to live there? So people get caught up where I have buyers that they won't go 5 or 10,000 up on any price house. And you're like, wait a minute, this is going to cost you pennies. I said, when I tell people what's the max they want to offer, I said, I want you to offer the max that my famous phrase is comfortably uncomfortable with. Because if that means, if I told you that someone paid 10,000 more and got the house, would you be upset? And if they said, no, I would let it go at that, then great. Then that's what you should offer. But if you find out that someone was going to pay 10,000 more than you planned on offering, would you be upset? And they said, yes. I said, well, then I think we should raise it another 10 or 12 just to try to increase your chances of that. And then you won't be disappointed with me. I won't be disappointed with you. And the same thing, I always encourage listing agents, which is tough. I said, hey, they really want the house, please come back to us with a counter offer. If these terms aren't acceptable, we'd really like to be kept in the mix, and just try to, without bugging the listing agent, just try to let them know that you're there and here's what you bring to the table as an agent, And I think the one thing when you're presenting these offers that I find great when I get multiple offers as a listing agent, and I incorporated it years ago, and I think a lot of people are doing this, but for people that aren't doing it on the listing agent side, when you receive an offer and you get a large type bullet point debriefing of the offer, of the price, the contingencies, just quickie stuff on the people. I know we're not supposed to do buyer letters anymore, just a quick background on the people, just simple stuff. But it's something that when you have a multiple offer, when you send a seller 16 offers, in reality, it's highly likely they're not going to look through all this paperwork. So I also do, when I have multiple offers, I have a spreadsheet. I'm happy to share with anybody, but I have a spreadsheet that I put out where I have the offers across the top, all the pertinent information, price, down payment, everything in columns on a graph chart, old school style. But I scan that to the seller so that they don't really have to, they're welcome to look through everything. I send them the whole offer, but I'm like, I've surmised the bullet points and the important parts of each offer for you here. So then we kind of concentrate on that sheet. It saves me a lot of time as an agent by having everything right in front of them. And then we just refer to them as the people's last name. Like, okay, the Podolsky offer, the couple from Wisconsin, I like their offer, but, and then we decide who we're going to counter, who we're not going to counter, whether we're going to do a bulk counter. But I do my offers like that because I have agents call all the time. Oh, that's so helpful just to have it. And I know some of these people, everybody's not 25 anymore. So print it in a bigger type. I get these offers sometimes where the letter is like smaller than the smallest email. And I'm like, okay, now I got to blow this up because I'm sending it to my 75-year-old seller. And they're going to be like, I can't even read the letter, the cover letter. So just trying to do simple stuff like that. And then I always tell people the other thing is when you're contacting your clients or you're in a transaction, because I do a lot of stuff for new agents. And I said, God, that's one of the simplest tips is please change your subject line in your email. It's like, do not have a chain of emails where the subject line is answering your question about the home inspection, and then you're going back to look for an email and you have now 50 emails with that same subject line. It's a nightmare. So change it, saying question answered, now water heater resolution, but change that topic on your email so you don't have this endless chain of emails where you're trying to go back and find it. How many times have we all had somebody say, hey, do you remember, what couch they wanted in the family room, or what lamp they wanted to be included, or what mirror? And I'm like, I don't know. So then I have to go back to this chain. So I'll have the title email be like, mirror the buyers want included. That's my subject line. And then we can go find those things simply. But whether it's loan, negotiation, buyer, seller side, to me, that's like, I tell these newer agents, I'm like, please do not send these emails where you go back and you've got the same subject line for 50 emails. It's like, just differentiate it so you can find stuff and keep a record. So if I'm texting somebody, I will always, whether they do email, or not, I will always follow it up with an email so that I have a record of both in a text and an email. Because sometimes these text chains get lost, or you have too many texting go. So I'll just say, as per our conversation, as per our text, this is what we've agreed to. These are the terms. Please let me know that we're all on the same page, just so to avoid any misunderstandings. Because sometimes what people do in a text or what they do in an email or a conversation doesn't translate the same. So it's like putting that all together. So you're protecting yourself at the end, and then I can go back and say, oh no, remember, I confirmed it in this email. Let me send you a copy of it right here. And then even the subject line of the email, confirming our conversation regarding the home inspection credit, whatever you're calling it. And then you're covering yourself. It just makes it so much easier.
Yeah, 100%, man. It's something that, unfortunately, I think that many agents, and I've been guilty of this too, of overlooking, of not keeping those detailed records, right? Yeah. And then when it's too late, it's too late. Right.
You panic when somebody asks and you can't find it. You're like, oh my God, then you look like an idiot. Oh my God, I can't find that email. Where's that email? You're like,
well, and then even not just, but with phone calls, it's like, okay, right. Well, how do you not just get into a he said, she said in the mediation or in court, or something comes up, right?
I had it as simple as, I had a buyer recently, and weirdly enough, they're looking at 3 different houses all on the same street in different 100 blocks. So my assistant sends out an email, says, oh, questions on Etna Street. And I said, wait a minute. I said, they're looking at 3 different houses on Etna. So it even got so confusing that we booked a second showing at the wrong house because we didn't have the address in the subject line of the email. And that was partially the buyer's fault. Yeah, we'd really like to get back into Etna. I'm like, which Etna? We have 3 different ones we've looked at. Same, we're in an unusual street name, and it's a long street with many blocks, and these were probably a mile or 2 apart. But important that we know which house. We don't want to be selling the wrong house on the wrong street. Same thing goes with offers. Like, people will look at these at same street, different addresses. There was actually a play written by somebody I know about 20 years ago about how they actually sold the wrong house. They put the wrong, nobody noticed the address in the offer. They sign off on the house, and they're like going for the home inspection. They're at the house they think they bought, but they've actually signed a contract on another house. So, so very rare, but that can happen. So be careful.
Yeah, 100%. I know we're going long here on time. Just a couple last questions for you. And the first one is, we're all tied to this amazing industry that's, changed all of our lives, and both mine and your lives. We have realtors, team leaders, broker owners, and also we get a lot of people watching and listening to this podcast that are, thinking about taking this on as a new career. But with that being said, for anybody that's watching and listening, where is the best place? They want to continue following you on the success journey, or if they have a referral for your market, whatever that may be, where the best place and or places to follow you, to get in touch with you, and all of that.
For me, getting in touch with me, my best is probably email, just at the andrew@andrewmanning.com.
Okay.
That's the other one. I keep simple emails. Don't get into these crazy emails, because everybody gets lost, and watch out for those underscores in the email, because that drives me nuts when I forget to put that in. But yeah, no, andrew@andrewmanning.com. I'm happy to answer questions or help people on anything. And yeah, but the referral network's been great. Like we talked about off air, like I started that years ago, and I told people, I said, hey, I always like to find out, even if you're not selling, let's say your friend is selling their house with another friend, and you're having a conversation with him. Oh no, we're going to use Sally. She's going to sell the house. I'm like, where are you guys going? we're moving to North Carolina. So I always say, you know, God, I have some really good agents in North Carolina. Are you working with anybody there? No, we're just kind of looking online, doing our own thing. I said, well, how would you like me to maybe interview a couple of these agents in North Carolina, in the area you're looking to move to? You know, see, you know, I'll get the questions going. I'll tell them what you're looking for, try to do a personality match. So you're finding an agent that would be a good mix with that client. And I've done that so often all over the country where people love it. They're like, you would interview the agents for us? I'm like, sure. Do a little Zoom call. And it doesn't take, what's it going to take you, 20 minutes? I mean, I have a lot of clients moving to Austin. So I found this amazing agent, works for a company in Austin, never met him, but we've talked on the phone several times. I've referred 6 people to him. They're all looking, 2 in escrow, but I mean, these are 25% referral fees, you know, on houses that are between $300,000 to like $800,000, because I took 20 minutes of my time to interview a couple agents, set up a referral structure with that agent, and then segued them on to the other one. And so I've made, you know, over the years, I've made hundreds of thousands of dollars in referral fees by just going that extra step and saying, hey, let me interview a couple agents for you, or I have a great agent, let's try and get something. And to be honest, it's not always an agent with my company. I try to find the person that I think is the best personality match, the most knowledgeable in their neighborhood, somebody who's not too busy so they're being passed down the line, but somebody who's busy enough to know their marketplace and be in touch with what's going on. But it's been a huge success for me, because most people are like, oh, you're moving to North Carolina. Okay, have fun. They don't even think about like, there's a business opportunity there for you, and also to get future business from that realtor. So the Austin guy has somebody from Austin who just got a job back in LA. So he just referred me a buyer that's coming back to LA. So we potentially have 7 deals from this one agent, you know, on referrals back and forth, which I love. So I've done that, and it went so far. I had people moving to Europe. So I'm like, our company has an international marketing thing. So I've referred 3 people to Madrid, another one to Barcelona, somebody in Paris, another person in Holland. I mean, because whatever it is, I'll find it for you. So it's like, I love doing that because it's kind of a great reach out to meet other agents and kind of see how other people are doing their business, and they'll share some of their marketing ideas with me. And I'm like, well, you send me over a little bit about yourself and I'll share it with the clients and make sure that your referral arrangement's in place. And then I pass the names on to the client. Boy, they think you're a hero because you've now interviewed another agent who you know is going to be a likely good fit for them. And you know you're going to have a referral check coming down the road. So you could be sitting at home and not even, you know, showing houses or doing anything, but setting somebody else up in another state, and you know you're going to have a check coming in and you haven't left your office.
Yeah. Well, and then too, you know, all those agents in that referral network are getting your newsletter. You're
Right.
So you're always front of mind. Yeah, right.
Right.
And you know, like you know, again, like that, like if I'm not doing Austin, Texas, I'm gonna start running ads in like your marketplace about, you know, top 10 reasons to consider moving to Austin, Texas from, you know, California or whatever that may be.
Exactly.
Right. But then as those people are coming in, oh, hey, I got the agent for you, you know, right. And then, you know, so it can become so massive, but you're, you know, keeping that relationship, keeping that front of mind. And, you know, a follow-up question to that. And I get this question a lot from listeners and so forth of, okay, so when you are sending these referrals out, like what is, you know, because again, I mean, this is your clients, you built this relationship, and obviously like you've done such an amazing job at being that trusted advisor, really becoming a friend and kind of part of their family. They're you know, so you want to make sure that things are continuing to go well and so forth. How then often do you stay in touch with the other agent and those clients, like those 6 clients that are moving out to Austin? You know, I mean, do you ask the other agent, hey, can you, or maybe another way to frame this is, what would you expect? What would be a great way for, let's just say you referred me somebody here in Phoenix, for me to keep you updated, to reassure you, you know, that things are going good, you know, like weekly updates, or again, because it's easy for things to get slipped through the cracks to, you know, then find out after it's too late that our clients had a bad experience, you know, and or maybe the referral fee forgot to get paid or whatever.
You know, it's a great question because I do 2 things. One, like this guy in Austin is great without even asking. He's texting me back, and these are all future listings for me that I'm working on that are either coming or not on the market yet. So he's even texting me, hey, I just want to, you know, Linda's interviewing other agents, but I told her that, you know, you're the best guy for the job. So he's like singing my praises, you know, and people will tend to believe somebody that they've never met before. Like if someone you never met before called you up and said, hey, you've underpriced your house, you're gonna be like, oh, of course I have, you know, you've never met the person. It's like, I had a listing one time where the older lady called me over and she says, will you bring the listing contract over to the house? I said, yeah. And so I come in the door, she's like 82 years old. She tears the listing contract up. And I'm like, what's the matter? She goes, the mailman told me you underpriced the house, so I'm not using you. I'm like, what? I was like, yeah, so you're like confidence. So, but these referral sources are great. You got to keep in touch though, because sometimes these referrals don't work out. Sometimes they're not a match. So what I say to the person I'm referring is I say, hey, I think this is a great guy or woman for you, but please let me know how it goes when you guys meet. You know, we're going to Austin next week. We're going to look. So everybody's been great with that so far, but occasionally somebody will say, oh, no, she didn't really understand. We didn't feel like it was. I said, you know what? Then I said, I've got a second person I think might be great for you. So I don't give up. Then I say, let's try somebody else. Sometimes rarely I'll get a call from while they're back to wherever they're looking saying, yeah, you know, the agent didn't show up, or, you know, they showed us all the wrong stuff. We're not feeling the love. You know, we didn't really care for her or him. And then I'll be like, well, you know, go back to your hotel. I'm going to get the next one for you and we'll figure it out. But that's very rare. Usually the research I do up front by just chatting with people, finding a little background about them, and then giving them some information about the client. So by the time they call the client, it's not a cold lead. They know about the client, they know their kids, what the kids do, what they're looking for with schools, what the professions are, what the parents or, you know, the couple, whoever it is. So they have enough background that they know what they're looking at. And then I'll ask the people, like, what kind of house are you looking for back then? Like, oh, we don't want to spend more than X, and I want a wraparound front porch. So I'll pass on a lot of that early information. And what this guy in Austin has been great with is, so he already knows what they want. So the very first call, he said, oh, you know, this guy was great. He said, have you seen anything that you really like? Yeah, we saw these 2 houses online that we really like. And they said, oh, if you saw those 2, I found another 5 that I think you guys would be really interested in. And had you thought about going to this next neighborhood over? Because, you know, and so they felt he was super informative by giving them direction on some other options in there. So I absolutely recommend following up. And I usually ask them, hey, would you just shoot me a quick email? Let me know how the meeting goes. And I do that to both sides, the client and the referral agent. Let me know. So I want to make sure the stories match. So if the client says it's all great and the referral agent says they're idiots, then we know that's not a good match. But, you know, usually I would say 9 times out of 10, it's a success. So, you know, and sometimes it gets to the point where the people decide not to move, but we have an agent connection made, and maybe they're waiting a year or what have you to make that move. But usually in this marketplace, if they're thinking of moving to, most of the clients I have in California are moving to Arizona, Oregon, Texas, Nashville, and the Carolinas, and a little Florida too. So those are our 6 hot spots where everybody's going to. So I try to establish connections in those neighborhoods so that if people are going in, that you don't just drop them. Like, you know, great. I love as a listing broker when people are moving, because I'm thinking, oh God, this is a nightmare to find somebody a house in this market. I love that you're moving out of state. I just want to sell your house and we'll move on to the next one. But don't miss that opportunity of potentially referring them to their next step.
Yeah. Have you started to like incorporate, whether it's in your conversations when you're reaching out to people and or in any of your, I don't know, maybe it's something in your email or newsletter communication, or just informing them of, you know, if you're considering leaving California, you know, right, you're looking for a realtor, like, you know, I can align you. So it's, you know, not waiting for that conversation to come up, but planting.
Absolutely. I have done that. I don't do it like weekly, because I felt that it might seem a little too hard, but I'll splice in articles about like the most popular places that people are going. And then I'll put under the article, I'll put like in bold type, it'll say, you know, Andrew has connections, you know, all over the country. If you're looking for an agent, you know, in another area, you know, please call him. Perhaps we can set you up with someone with, you know, equal standards and same ethics, you know, that type of thing. So they think that you're doing them a favor, not that you're just trying to make a referral.
Yep.
You want somebody to be excited about that you moved them, and that they're excited about where they're going. And then they're still going to remember you, even if they move to Austin and they have another friend that wants to move somewhere else, they're going to refer you from Austin back to their friend in your neighborhood. So you don't let that connection go just because they moved out of state. Keep in touch with these people, because they're always going to have a friend or a relative who's going to say, hey, do you know any good agents in such and such a neighborhood? So just because they're leaving town, don't take them off your list. Keep
Yeah,
them-
and I mean, with as intentional as you've been with this, and as it continues to snowball, I mean, this can become such a full-time, large source of revenue where it's like, you don't necessarily have to sell, like you're just getting so much from the, right? Like, and not that you maybe want to ever do that, but again, it's.
My best one was that's going on right now. That's an escrow. Is I had a client sold the mother's house. Got him to redo the house. I mean, cosmetically, stage it, do all the things we all like to do. Listen to everything I said. Got an amazing price for the house, and then he had mentioned something. The dad was a doctor, and he says, "Yeah, my daddy built this medical office building," and I said, "Really?" I said, "What are you guys doing with that?" And he said, "Well, we got trouble with the tenants. This is before COVID. We got, he says something about they have like 38 tenants." I said, 38 tenants? It's supposed to be a huge building. He says, "Oh yeah, it's an eight-story medical building across from one of the big hospitals in the area." And he says, "It's just a giant pain. It's like my brother and I own it, but I manage it myself, and I'm retired now. And it's just huge. I'm thinking of just turning it over to a management company." And I said, "Have you ever thought about selling it?" Or he says, "Yeah, we're probably going to sell it in a year." So all of a sudden I'm like, medical building. So I'm like, whoop, I get a commercial referral. So that building is now it's been in 2 different escrows, but it's closing escrow next month. And so I negotiated a referral for myself, but that building ended up selling for $13.5 million.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get a 20% referral fee. So it's like, but most agents would have been like, "Oh, medical building. I don't know anybody that does medical buildings." I didn't either, to be honest, but I researched it, asked around, found somebody at another company who was great on a big team. And we have that one in escrow, and that's probably gonna be my biggest referral ever. So that's who knew I'm doing that. I put the medical building in my newsletter, like in escrow. Medical building.
I mean, at the end of the day, the most successful business owners, entrepreneurs are the best problem solvers. And that's what you're doing, right? Like,
Absolutely.
How can I solve this problem? How can I solve their problem for them? And so powerful. So, all right, last question here for you. Out of this, 35 years of experience, amazing career, if Andrew today could go back in time, like, let's just say, Andrew, 35 years ago, your younger self, and you're sitting there, all of a sudden you see the Back to the Future DeLorean just laying in front of you. And all of a sudden, you today should jump out of there, your older version of yourself, and you're able to give yourself some pieces of advice. Maybe that's like hey, the future's going to be amazing. It's going to be better than you ever thought it would ever imagine. But look, you got to make sure that you get these couple things right, or make sure to not do these things or stop doing these things. So if you could, with everything now today, if you could give your younger self, a few pieces of advice, what would those pieces of advice be now, knowing what you know now today?
I think today, it's a great question, but I think today I would be like, in the beginning, I was very shy as an agent. I was afraid to try new things. I was like, I tried cold calling back in the day when people were doing that. Every time I cold called, I got a listing appointment, and it was like, I don't know why I didn't keep doing it. I just hated the process of it. I never did door knocking, but back in the day I did cold calling, and I got several listings out of that, but I never really pursued it because I was just not comfortable with it. But I think trying different things is a great is a great thing to do. And for me, probably my biggest source of advice would be I would have saved more money and bought more property, is what I really would have done, because I didn't really start buying property for myself until maybe 7-8 years ago, talking about things that weren't my primary residence. And I was always of the mindset that like, oh, am I going to have another deal, or is next year going to be like this year? And when I look back in history, if I realized that I was on a cycle and I was always doing a little better and prices were going up or down, but even in the down markets, now that I've been through a couple of down markets, I knew that now I do really well in the down market because I knew how to pivot, my business in the down market. So maybe I was making a little less money, but I was doing fine. So I kill myself thinking about all these things, but there's always those pocket full of listings that you're like, oh God, if I could turn back the clock, I would have bought that house or this house, or I wouldn't have sold my last house or whatever. There's always that. But I think advice to myself would have been, God, don't be so scared. Try some new things, put yourself out there. And, basically all they can do is say no. So if somebody says no, what I always tell people all the time, somebody says no, you're one answer closer to the yes. So just keep taking the no's. You're going to get a yes down the road.
Yeah, love it. Powerful stuff, man. Powerful words. And the great thing for you is you got into this industry so young, relatively.
Absolutely.
You're still, even though 35 years in this business, you're still young, right? And a lot long.
Relatively, yeah.
Yeah, I love it, man. And Andrew, I know how busy you are, and the fact that you took time out of your busy day to be here, man, it means so
it's a pleasure. Yeah, you do a great job with these casts. I've been a fan, so I was excited to be invited.
Yeah, no, it was an honor, my friend, and we truly appreciate it. And
my pleasure.
Yeah, 100%. Those watching and listening, as always, truly appreciate you being here. Truly appreciate all your support. Keep up the amazing work. Keep kicking ass, and we will see you next time. Peace.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this GSD Mode podcast episode. Now make sure you get shit done and smash that subscribe button now.